the amazing, illustrious moderator for this event from the climate team in the Obama administration. I'm so excited that you're here, Kevin. How lucky are we? Who feels lucky right now? Like, who feels so damn, you feel lucky? Why do you feel lucky? Come on, ambassadress. Wow. I wish my Jewish mother was here to hear you say that. She wouldn't believe it. She said she didn't say that. How amazing this. We're here to have a conversation, to be witness to a conversation about climate change, America, the world, with one of the most senior folks representing us to the United Nations, the ambassador to the United Nations, and Ambassador Greenfield, on behalf of our community here at Manny's. We're so honored that you're here. Thank you so much. And our hometown hero, okay? Our hometown hero, the illustrious Congresswoman Barbara Lee. So we're going to talk about this. It's going to be a short panel. She's a mini panel, baby. She's 30 minutes. These people got places to go. So tune in. We're going to have a little bit of time for questions. I think afterwards there's some time to mingle with the ambassador of 10, 15 minutes, but we're in and out. Manny's, as you know, is a physical space for civic engagement and political gatherings. We've hosted over 2,000 events since we opened. There's a marching band, love. Not sure why, but just love that. Come on, marching band. I do want to just let everyone know who doesn't know that our restaurant is a nonprofit run by an organization called Farming Hope. They hire and train formerly homeless and formerly incarcerated individuals. They hire them and train them in our kitchen and then place them in a full-time employment. And I'm proud to say that over 40 people have graduated from the apprentice program here at our kitchen and now have full-time jobs, thanks to Farming Hope. And Alexa right over there runs Farming Hope at Manny's. Alexa, raise your hand so everyone can see who you are. She's amazing. We've got a small but mighty team here, and we're just very proud for all the things that we do. Thank you for all of you for coming. And with that, I will let Kevin take it away and we can begin this amazing conversation. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks so much, Manny. These two women here don't need much of an introduction. My job, if I do it well, is to talk very little. And so allow me to just get us kicked off here. As Manny said, my name is Kevin Sammy. I spent some time in the Obama administration on the climate team. I've also spent some time in the foreign policy world. Between these two individuals up here with me, we have two of the foremost thinkers and doers in foreign and domestic policy, and have been trailblazers as the first and only Black women to do those things in their positions. Truly living legends up here. So I just want to recognize that and to start things off. And in terms of these careers, just some quick notes on bios for folks that might not already know. Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield has spent her career in foreign service, previously Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, and then also ran the Foreign Service department, if you will. So all 70,000 strong Foreign Service officers. That was what she oversaw. Today represents the United States as a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and is our representative on the Permanent Security Council. Not sure if folks are tracking. Pretty relevant these days, given what's going on in the world. And Congresswoman Lee, her tenure, a generation of representation for communities here in this Bay Area and in the 13th district, came up in California state politics. The list is deep, but I can truly say a person who has voted and acted and represented based on her convictions, a profile in courage. So just appreciate your service and excited to get going. So let's start with this. Ambassador, your remit is international affairs. It's focused on the globe. You were just in Chicago, and now you're here doing these town halls, these community engagements. Why?
Thank you. On?
Yes.
Good. The United Nations is seen and viewed like it's a different world. And when I started my position there, I made clear that it was important for me to take the United Nations out of New York and take it to the American people. President Biden said he wanted a foreign policy for middle-class Americans. And our foreign policy is about what we do with other countries in the world, including what we do in New York. And what we do globally has everything to do with what is important to people locally. So I visited Chicago a couple of weeks ago to talk about food insecurity and how food insecurity was impacting people in Chicago like it was impacting people around the globe. Here, I came to San Francisco to talk about the UN and the importance of the UN. The UN started in San Francisco 77 years ago. We're having our 77th UNGA starting in a few days. So I thought it was important to talk about our agenda at the UN, about UN reform, to talk about food insecurity, to talk about our agenda dealing with climate change, and to talk about how we deal with global health. And so that's what I'm doing.
Well, we'll certainly appreciate the historic nature of this city's presence in formation of the UN. Congresswoman Lee, among the leadership posts you have in the U.S. Congress, one is the chair of the subcommittee in the Appropriations Committee on State and Foreign Operations. Piggybacking on what the ambassador mentioned here, how is foreign policy a kitchen table issue to the people you represent and to everyday Americans?
Thank you, Kevin, so much. Thanks. Good to see you. And good afternoon, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. Manny, where's Manny? I want to thank you again for really doing your job, being a leader, bringing the community together to talk about domestic and foreign policy, but also really setting the example of what a true community center, cultural center, restaurant, training center, you name it, could be in an urban community. So thank you, Manny, very much for this. And to Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, you know what? I have got to just say one thing, no, two things about the ambassador. I just returned from, led a congressional delegation as chair of my subcommittee, which I'll talk about in just a minute, but to Germany, met with General Langley, AFRICOM, which provides for the security arrangements for the continent of Africa, Ghana, Senegal, Italy, Rome, you name it. But everywhere I go, and I've been in Poland, Germany earlier this year, and there's no one who gets the recognition as being the world's ambassador other than our ambassador. I mean, she has planted the seeds in so many countries. First of all, to ensure that development and diplomacy and the democracy and that all of the values of a foreign policy are at least presented to countries in terms of our leadership and what we believe in. And people really respect you, admire you, and really recognize the importance of her as being our ambassador at this point in history, because so much of what she does abroad is connected to what the challenges are for us here at home. And so that's what I'm so pleased, and I'd say only an African-American woman could do that because of, really because of the challenges that Black women and Black people have faced in our country. And so having said that, I am also the United Nations representative. You know, the Congress has a Democratic representative of the UN and a Republican representative. So I'm the Democratic representative. And I've done work with the United Nations since our beloved Ron Dellums. You know, I was chief of staff to Ron and I was his liaison to the UN. But I chair now the subcommittee on state and foreign operations, which is the subcommittee. Never have we had an African-American chairing that subcommittee on appropriations. We're responsible for funding the United Nations, peacekeeping, all of our development and diplomatic and humanitarian and food security, World Food Program, everything that's non-defense comes through my subcommittee. So I have a $64 billion budget, not nearly enough because defense has about 800 billion. And the three legs of our foreign policy are development, which I have, diplomacy, right, and defense. So my job is to try to get more money from defense into my subcommittee. That's what I try to do. And so within the context of the UN and the celebration of his 1945, right? W.E.B. Du Bois, and when I was in Ghana, we went to visit W.E.B. Du Bois' house. He led an NAACP delegation to the United Nations in 1945, saying there's a direct connection between our struggles here for human rights, for dignity, for the end of racism and colonialism as we're fighting abroad. And so it's within that context, and I was thinking about W.E.B. Du Bois when I went to his house about how now with Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, how now we have a UN permanent mission for people of African descent, which we've worked on since Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, but we were finally able to put all that together at the United Nations under her leadership. So as chairing that subcommittee and with Congressman Gregory Meeks chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee, we're trying to really get the world to focus on the connections, on climate, on poverty, on all of our sustainable development goals. They apply here in our own country as well as abroad. So that's what we're trying to do, to bring the world together in essence. And that's her job, and I have to fund it. So thank you all again.
Thanks, Congresswoman. And I do have some questions from audience members here. You may have some pen and paper to pass around if you want to ask one. So we'll get to those after just a few more. Speaking of diplomacy and defense and its complex and relationship, when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was a lot of immediate need for response, a lot of kinetic worry and conflict still going on in a really big way. I want to zoom out a bit and ask generally, just given in this generation, the nature of that conflict being new to many people who are voting age, et cetera, in the ways that it has taken place, it has done two things, among others. It has reinforced the real fear and legitimacy of that worry of authoritarianism. And it really can overnight affect a population and a nation that is fighting for their democratic values. On the flip side, it has galvanized democracies. And I would love to hear from both of you just generally on this notion of defining and projecting and defending values abroad with the three pillars we have, and what that means in terms of translating that to a voting population, to understand what's going on, to understand that diplomacy matters, as well as security needs.
President Biden said when he was on the campaign trail that we were fighting for the soul of the nation. In multilateralism, we're fighting for the soul of the globe. And we have to be engaged globally. We have to boost up and support democracies and like-minded countries. And we have to be able to tell a story to the people of the world that democracy delivers to the people. There's a sense among authoritarians that they actually have a leg up on us. And the truth is they don't. When you talk to ordinary people, they know that democracy is what they want. They know that engagement with the United States is what they want, that China and Russia are not going to deliver, that Russia's attack on Ukraine is not, it's not right. And so we have to really stand up to ensure that we're getting our message out. We're engaging with people, we're talking to people, and then we're talking to Americans everywhere so that they understand that hungry people anywhere have an impact on us, that we don't want to sit and watch people starve elsewhere in the world. We don't want to sit and see people with COVID not be able to get vaccines. So we have to engage globally to address the issues and the problems that we're all facing. And that's what being a democratic country is about.
Sure, thanks, Ambassador. And Congresswoman Lee, the invasion quickly became a kitchen table issue as soon as you went to the pump to try to fill your tank of gas. Just your general reflections on how you contemplate a moment of crisis and how that translates into your leadership and your work in Congress.
Yeah, let me just say, this threat to democracy in Eastern Europe and Europe is a threat to us right here at home, because it's the same authoritarian tendencies and leadership that we see right here at home through Donald Trump and the banker. And I can say that because I'm a Democrat and I can be partisan, the ambassador camp, but I can say it. And so we have to know that this is a threat to our democracy right here at home, and is very connected to the worldwide struggle to erode democracies everywhere. And Ukraine is an example of what is taking place. And let me take a moment. We're in the speaker's district, and I just want to applaud the speaker for her leadership, because she has done tremendous work in bringing us together. I was at the Munich Security Summit with the speaker on the delegation, then in Poland. And we've been all over looking at all of the issues around Ukraine and what we can do as a country to respond. And so a couple of things. First, the refugee crisis is horrific, and we have to not let the public understand we still have to support the Ukrainian people. And we have to make sure that the resources are there for their food, for their transport. I mean, the refugee crisis is still, it's outrageous. And so that, again, I have the privilege to be able to fund a lot of what we're talking about today. But secondly, with regard to democracies, and I have to go to what I see taking place now on the continent of Africa, the Caribbean, and throughout the world, because there's a void that Russia and China is filling right as we speak on the continent of Africa. And you know why? Because in many respects, we've been missing in action. And I see this every single place I go. And so what we have to do, and you know, the drivers and the seeds of terrorism are sown with young people in despair. And so what we have to understand is we've got to put more development, resources on the continent, but also listen to people in their villages, listen to the African people and the people who are in the Caribbean and who are around the world, and what they need the United States to do and what it needs to help, because they would rather, and again, being in Ghana and Senegal recently, they want the United States presence. They want to engage with us. They want to engage with us respectfully on a host of issues, starting with climate. And so I just think we have to really look inward and look at ourselves and say, how are we going to move forward now and be the leader of the world who really respects developing countries and their needs and aspirations, but who also can support financially investments that would, I would say, that would make China and Russia understand that, you know, we're the partners of choice. And we have not done that yet. And that's what we're working on. And that is, again, critical to our democracy here at home.
I appreciate that, Congresswoman. It's engagement matters, and investment in engagement matters, and frequency and depth of engagement matters. And those examples you gave are perfect snapshots of that point. I'm gonna move to a question from the audience here before we come back to talk climate. So this particular member works for UNICEF, and the question is, how do you think the best way is to advance rights for children given all of the crises in the world?
Thank you for asking that question. And the reason I'm thanking you is because right now, and I talked about this yesterday at the United Nations in the Security Council, thousands of Ukrainian children are being separated from their families, taken from their homes, forcibly adopted, and their families may never see them again. And we have to stand up against this kind of aggression, these kinds of human rights violations that we see taking place every day. So many children are being victimized. So many children are being kept from going to school, being forced into refugee status. Over 15 million Ukrainians have been forced to leave their homes. I met children when I was in Moldova and Romania, and talked to young children who were totally traumatized by the experience of being forced from their homes. And UNICEF has the core responsibility for the protection of children, but we all have to support those efforts. We have to call out those efforts. to call out those actions being taken by countries like Russia, but also push for the UN and other protection organizations to look to see how they can better provide protection and support to children because they're innocent. We're seeing children who are starving to death. The word that UNICEF uses now is wasting, and it's so descriptive of what we see happening to children. And every single one of us, I'm a grandmother. I can't imagine seeing my own grandchildren go through what I'm seeing Ukrainian children, African children who are victims of conflict go through. So again, this is a work in progress, but we're not doing enough. We have to keep pushing the agenda on this.
Yeah, let me just add to that because children, I mean, they're our future. They're the future of the planet. And what is taking place, and I'll just specifically talk about and add on to Ukraine. We're talking about now human trafficking in ways that we've never seen before of young girls out of Ukraine. And so just in this last bill, I was able to get some language, and we met in Poland with the NGOs who were dealing with it, and they gave us some ideas on what to legislate and fund. But secondly, so many of these young girls are being raped by Russian soldiers. And so many of them are getting pregnant. So many of them get to Poland, but there's no access to abortion in Poland. And so we're trying now, and so many girls want 11, 12-year-old girls want to have an abortion. And so we have to support the countries, the third countries, where the girls are being are able to travel to so that they can get their own abortion. And so this has many, many layers in terms of children, just in Ukraine, but it is happening all around the world. But just being there and seeing and hearing this firsthand from these unbelievable NGOs working on the ground in Poland made me think about my grandchildren and really forced me to think about the future of our planet and what in the world is going to happen if we're not treating children as if they too have human rights and the right to live a safe and fruitful life.
Appreciate that perspective from both of you. Some of the crises will hopefully have the effect of helping us build the infrastructure that's needed to protect from current and future crises getting worse. I have a couple questions from the audience around climate change, speaking of the future. Just a few weeks ago, a historic law was passed in Congress, and Congresswoman Lee, certainly thanks to some of your leadership, and that has implications abroad. I remember my time in the Obama administration, there was global presence and leadership to bring the Paris Accords together. And, as folks here know, we had an absence of that leadership, a vacuum, and others took our place. Now we will be going to after the UN General Assembly, COP27, Conference of the Parties, International Climate Negotiations, with arguably the strongest position we've had. I'd love to start first with you, Congresswoman Lee, on just the architecting of that law and its importance, and then Ambassador would love to talk a bit about what that means for us on the international stage.
Yeah, well, the architecture of that law was a big fight.
Sure.
You know what happened? We broke out better than Congress, but
Yep.
we got it done. We got to carbon emissions with a 40% by 2030. I mean, that's a big deal. But also, we were able to put resources in to begin to address climate crisis. I believe it's an emergency. I mean, I believe there is a climate emergency. So that's my point of view. And so in the bill, we looked at how we would get to achieving the 80% of the way where we have to get to the reduction of carbon emissions, 80%. But also, we in this put $60 billion in to address issues around environmental injustice. Not enough, and we need to do more. But just in terms of what we did with my bill, because I have all of the global climate accounts. And so I just want to, can I just read a couple of numbers from last year? Okay, so this is because it directly relates to this. We did $270 million for adaptation programs to help the most vulnerable groups of the most vulnerable clients. 185 million for sustainable landscape programs to fight the devastation and assistance management, coastal management. The global environmental facility, we put in 149 million. We put 260 million in for clean energy programs to help low-income countries to celebrate, their efforts to a green economy. But let me say what we're trying to do this year, real quick. Again, the global Green Climate Fund comes through my committee. We've never funded it before. We tried last year, got it in the bill, got it to the Senate, and they, what?
Sure.
So this year we tried again. We got it in my bill, 1.6 billion for the first time for the Green Climate Fund. And that's the largest multilateral fund dedicated to helping developing countries deal with the change in climate. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, yeah, I wanted to, okay, real quick. 1.6 billion for the Green Climate Fund, which is the largest multilateral organization dedicated to helping developing countries deal with the climate crisis. We did 350 million in clean technology. That's a fund that the World Bank leads. We did 300 million for sustainable landscapes. We did 450 million for adaptation programs and 390 million for clean energy programs. I cite this because it's historic. So thank you. Now we got to get the bill done. But once it's done, then the ambassador will be able to execute on all of the resources, your tax dollars, and we're trying to do the right thing by.
It's a great segue.
And it is, because what that does is it says to the rest of the world that we are committed to addressing climate change. I can't tell you how devastated people were when we withdrew from the Paris Agreement. And I can't tell you how elated they were when we went back into the Paris Agreement. One of the first things that the president did when his administration started. I was honored the day that the president announced my selection as the UN ambassador. He announced the selection of former Secretary John Kerry to be the special envoy for climate, saying to the world that that is one of the most important priorities of the administration. So this bill and the funding that it provides will give other countries the confidence to know that we are there with them. We, among others, emit about 80% of the carbon into the environment. And then there are hundreds of countries, including 45 in Africa, that are small emitters, but are suffering significantly from climate change. So in order for their commitments to be honored, they need our support. And this bill gives them that support.
And, given and just a follow-up on that question, the energy crisis that has spurred from the invasion in Ukraine, managing that along with our climate goals, would love to just hear a bit from you on that global stage in those 10 Security Council sessions, as I can only imagine, with Russia being a permanent member, balancing the need to ensure electricity reliability and cost for Europeans and Americans, and also decarbonization goals on the international stage. We'd love to just hear your reflection on that.
There's never been a sense among the Europeans that I've engaged with that they are even thinking about rolling back their commitments because of the pain that the Russian war is causing on their energy prices. So what we've seen among our European colleagues, and then as well here, is that they are looking for novel ways. They're looking for creative ways to address their energy needs without having to compromise their commitment to the environment. I think the Russian government, Putin in particular, thought that putting pressure on energy in Europe would cause the Europeans to back away from support to Ukraine, and that has not happened. We saw the oil and gas prices go up significantly in the United States for a few weeks, But now we've seen those prices go back down. So we're making efforts to ensure that people are not continuing to suffer, but at the same time, looking for novel ways to address our energy needs without having to compromise our environmental commitments.
Yeah, and let me just say, having just returned from Africa, I have seen so many innovative projects. USAID, Peace Corps, they're returning now. And farmers, we went out in Senegal to a farming area with new ways of irrigation. And I think we need to support these efforts and look at their novel ways of beginning to utilize solar and alternative sources of energy, because the continent is, of course, we know most countries are poor and they've made a way out of no way. And we need to really look at that. And just finally on Ukraine, you know, the food crisis in Africa, of course, now is the driver is Ukraine. And the indicators are that there are 3 or 4 countries, maybe 5 countries will almost become, reach the indicators of famine. And so this is a big crisis in terms of food insecurity also, as it relates to the crisis in Ukraine, because the continent is suffering tremendously from a food shortage.
Sure.
And if I could just add to that, I was in Ghana as well, and Uganda. And I met with farmers, I met with market women who were selling in the markets, I met with people in the market who were buying. And they all are feeling the pain of the increased prices that they're paying for food, but also the shortages, and looking for ways to address those shortages. And what I found is that they appreciated the fact that we were there to talk about solutions, not just talk about the problem. And we were bringing solutions, and they know that at the start, we are the largest contributor to humanitarian assistance, having provided more than $7 billion to the World Food Program. And they're bringing that food to the continent, as well as to the Middle East and other countries that have felt the devastation of this war.
Thanks, Ambassador. And just time for a couple more questions here. Food security or food insecurity, I know is a priority of yours, and would love to just hear you reflect a bit more on that big picture. Was a priority prior to the crisis, and of course things are changing on the fly, but would love to hear you reflect a bit on that.
You know, when I arrived in New York in February of 21, 4 days before I took over as president of the Security Council, I outlined what my priorities would be as the ambassador to the United Nations, and humanitarian programs, and in particular food insecurity, was at the top of that agenda. So it was bad before the war in Ukraine. And there were issues that we had to address that were the result of climate, COVID, the COVID epidemic, and conflict, not the Ukraine conflict, but conflict elsewhere, where we've seen in conflict, war being used, or hunger being used as a tool of war. It was exacerbated by the situation in Ukraine, because so many of these countries were dependent on food aid that was purchased from Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine provides about 20 to 25% of the world's wheat requirements. Russia adds to that at around the same number, if not more. And so when this war started, an already bad situation got worse. And so in May of this year, Secretary Blinken joined me in New York to host another session during our presidency to discuss food insecurity. He held a ministerial in which we got over 100 countries to commit to working with us, sign the roadmap to address food insecurity. And we are continuing to work on that issue. President Biden will be hosting a ministerial during High Level Week on this issue as well.
Great.
Yeah, and also the supplemental, the resources, unheard of in terms of what we have put again into my bill for food security, but it's not enough. And one thing that we have to look at, the politics of food now is getting to be a little different. And we have to be cognizant of this because people have always in our country supported, for the most part, in a bipartisan way, food accounts, food security, famine relief, and what have you. But now what's happening in America is so many people are hungry. The hunger rates are going up. Food insecurity is going up in the United States until the debate now is, well, why don't we do more here in our own country? Because so many people are starving there, but we can't buy into that. Okay, and so the president's holding in Washington the White House conference on nutrition, food and nutrition, September 28th. And when we were in Rome, we met with Cindy McCain as our ambassador in Italy to the World Food Program. And we talked about how we message this, and hopefully you all will help us communicate to people that yes, we're working on this on all fronts. It's a global epidemic, famine, food insecurity space that the world is in now. So we can't say we'll only focus on our country and not the rest of the world, or the rest of the world and not our hungry people here, because then we get into the political fights. And it should not be that around starving children and people.
And I appreciate that perspective, Congresswoman. It leads to the final question that comes from the audience. And it stems from that notion of mutual exclusivity, or maybe a lack thereof. I think we can all agree, we're struggling in many ways to keep democracy intact at home. Certainly abroad, we are promoting and pushing and defending it in ways we can with all of the pillars at our disposal. Why is that important to do both? And this is a question I'd love for both of you to address, and we can end there, but why is it important to do both?
Well, we have to do both. First of all, I've been an observer, like I know our ambassador has been, to many, many countries to observe their, quote, fair and free elections and to document that they were fair and free. Looking at it from the values and lens of a democracy. Now, how in the world are we going to go abroad monitoring elections, promoting democracy as the preferred form of government, when in fact the democratic institutions in our own country are being challenged, and we see the rule of law being just set aside? We're seeing lawlessness each and every day by others, and you know who I'm talking about. And so, we have to, here at home, we see voter suppression. We see states electing people who are going to determine whether or not they like the candidates who were elected. And if they don't, they'll just say it's not a legal election. So we're challenged now in our own country, and we can't forget that. So when I go abroad now, monitoring elections and talking to people, I acknowledge the fact that first, yes, we have issues we have to deal with. We're a work in progress also, because it's very, it's not authentic to be saying democracy, not democracy, when in fact we don't say, yes, we're fighting to maintain and preserve our democracy here at home. And so this is a global issue that we all have to recognize, that what happens here in America, the rest of the world is watching, and the threats to democracy are real, but we can turn that around. And I know this is not man, can I say elections are coming up in November, so you all know what you have to do.
Let me just say that democracies around the world and people around the world look at the United States as a role model for democracy, despite our shortcomings, despite the attacks on our own democratic system. They see us, they see the freedoms that we have as an example for what they want. And they've been polls done all over Africa. 70% of Africans want democracy. And so we have to work with those countries and with those people to help build the capacity so that they can get the freedoms of democracy that we have shared. But at the same time, we have to continue to fight within our own country to ensure that the democratic values that we have established continue to flourish in our country. And people see what's happening here, but they also see that ultimately we were able on January 6th to complete the count of our vote and to have a peaceful nearly peaceful transfer of power. And so we have to continue to strengthen our democracy at home while modeling that so that people overseas can also feel the benefits of democracy. And it's about people. And what I heard when we came back into government is that people were afraid overseas because we lifted up their voices and they needed to continue to have their voices lifted up. And they wanted us to be there to help and support them.
Thank you, Ambassador. I know you have said the diplomat's weapon of choice is a microphone. So here's to you continuing to use that. And just thank you both for being here. Thanks for being here everyone on the